My name is Antoinette. My pronouns are she and they. I work at NoHo Home Alliance. I'm the housing coordinator. I'm an outreach worker, and I run the Studio City drop-in location. I've been doing work with the unhoused for just 2 years now. Once COVID started, it wasn't the thing I was doing before COVID. I did a lot of anti-racism work. I worked as a sensitivity reader. I started my own freelance editing business in 2017, and I kind of stepped away from that to do more hyper-local unhoused work. And because I was doing racial justice work both in my congregation, I attend the UU Studio City Church in Studio City. I met Jolly there, and I was doing racial justice work, and Jolly was doing climate justice work. And we discovered that climate justice and racial justice equal environmental justice. And so we began to do a lot more work digging into frontline communities and protesting things like the Sun Valley gas plant and things like that. Yeah. Do you want to talk more about you personally?
No, I just wanted to get a visual so that there's something to look at too.
Yeah. So
that's all.
That. And so, yeah, we've been doing activist work for a long time, and together for the past 2 years. We worked with Extinction Rebellion a little bit in summer of 2020. We've connected with various congressional candidates, and right now we're doing a lot of work both at NoHo and at Studio City Church as the pandemic rages on. But I do want to light a candle. Unitarian Universalists light a chalice when they do things. And so I'm lighting our chalice.
So yeah, like she had mentioned, we want to begin with a land acknowledgement. And as probably the people in this room know, so-called Los Angeles County is the home to the largest Indigenous population in the United States. And so for that reason, we recognize that we live and work in unceded Tongva Chumash land. And we pay respect and honor to the original caretakers of this land who've been here from ancient history till now. And they will continue to be here into the future. So now we must share this responsibility to safeguard the land, the air, and the water for those generations that follow us. Amen.
Amen.
So we wanted to at least give people a trigger warning and some kind of a moment to sort of assess how much of this information you either already know based on the pipeline, and how much, how in-depth we might want to go. I want to say that we want to show at least a small clip of a video, and that video has some violence in it, like actual violence from the pipeline action that we were a part of. But we definitely want to take a temperature check as to how people are feeling at 8 o'clock in the morning to talk about police violence and land destruction. So if that is something that people are feeling might be a little too uncomfortable, please let me know, and we can kind of back off. I see people.
Bring it on.
Go ahead.
Okay, good.
Okay. So the first part of this is just a small bit of history of Line 3, right? And this is stuff that we've learned over the past couple of years working with people that are doing the Line 3 defense, that are part of the treaty camps that were around the border. And so we were stationed more or less in northern Minnesota, right where that little slit says proposed Line 3 route. We were around that general area for the week that we were in Minnesota for July.
The northwest part of it,
yeah.
Of the split, yeah.
So the pipeline originally is already there, correct? And they have been working to reroute the pipeline. It's actually much larger than just through Minnesota. It starts in Alberta, Canada, and moves its way all the way through Wisconsin. And so parts of the biggest piece of why this has been continuously protested against is that they are building this or trying to rebuild this through Indigenous treaty lands, where Indigenous people have been saying, no, we do not want this. And the local governments have been ignoring that and allowing licenses to go through for Enbridge to complete their pipeline. And this has been a battle that's been going on, I believe, for the last 5 years. We just got involved very recently, but the Line 3 protests and concerns have been going on for 5 years. This was also, how can I rephrase that? Sorry, I'm tripping over myself. Go for it.
I think what you're trying to say is that in the same vein, these are the same activists and resistors that were working against Standing Rock,
Yes.
working against Keystone XL pipeline. Like this is, Line 3 was not the beginning of the fight for them.
And so it has been a continual fight to acknowledge their own lands. The other piece to that is that the pipeline runs through the headwaters of the Mississippi River. And so not only is it going to damage the land that it's actually put into, but it's going to flow into the Mississippi, which flows through quite a bit of the United States and into the Gulf of Mexico.
Right. Something like a third of our nation lives downstream of this, at least. That's incredible.
And so you can't build a pipeline that is 100% perfect, right? They leak. And this one leaks tar sands oil, which is mucky and gross and just the worst. Just the worst. And so part of it, when they were going through the court system years ago to say, please don't do this, it was because they knew that the pipeline already leaked. And so every time that they would try and ram another piece of this through, they would say, no, this pipeline leaks. We can't do this. There's no 100% for pipelines. This is not a good idea. And it's continued to be forced.
I have also this. Did you want me to show it now?
Yeah, there's a short clip that we found because they've been making movies about it and going through, and this is called The Necessity.
This is a trailer for a documentary that was being shot for this. Oh, you may or may not be able to hear it.
Hold on a second. I'm going to mute myself so that Jolly's computer can be heard.
Sorry, you have to go back to where you did the share screen and click share computer sound. It's a separate button.
Now you should be able to hear me on my computer instead. And I just want some thumbs if you can hear this.
Minnesota and what's now Minnesota, I mean, my people's territory is full of all these interconnected bodies of water. You look at something like that and you think, how could you possibly think to put something as dangerous as tar sands oil into something like that? The Enbridge Corporation has several lines here in the state of Minnesota. It is the largest pipeline company in the world. It solely exists to expand the fossil fuel industry through transport of the product.
One only has to Google pipeline safety to see the number of pipelines which have ruptured. But suppose there was an absolutely perfect pipeline system in the United States that had no faults and could never fail. Is that a good thing? No, because what we're supposed to be doing on a global scale is decreasing the supply of and the demand for oil.
Elsewhere in Minnesota, a trial began Monday for 3 activists who face felony charges for their civil disobedience action in 2016 when they manually turned off a pair of Enbridge tar sands pipelines.
Plant 67 is shut down. We did this action because the problem of climate change is so urgent that we have to start shutting tar sands pipelines down now.
A Minnesota judge has taken the unusual step of allowing 4 protesters to use a necessity defense.
For the climate change necessity defense, what you're saying essentially is, I did this. Yes, this is an illegal thing, I did this, but I did this because the harm of this is less than the harm that is caused by this thing I'm trying to fight.
The Val Turners took their action in response to a call by folks at Standing Rock for solidarity action. And so it's part of a larger push and a larger strategy to get the judicial system to respond to climate change in a just way.
With Indigenous people, I mean, we're impacted first and worst by climate change.
This is one of the pipelines that runs through Fond du Lac Reservation. I can feel the warmth through it on my moccasins.
We say no over and over again to these companies, but we've said no and we mean it. You know, like we're willing to stand out here and actually face what's coming.
Okay, so as you can see, that was Tara Hauska and some other members of the Ojibwe tribe there, talking about not our action in particular, but talking about the pipeline project itself. So a few things I think that are important to highlight is that this is not what you think of as an oil pipeline, like the Continental Pipeline, for instance, right? Where there's just thin black fluid flowing through. These are called tar sands pipelines because it's actually like a thick sludge. This is unrefined oil from in Alberta that, as you can see, is just trying to make it out to a port to get out to the ocean to be refined elsewhere. So that means that through these fragile wetlands, they're pushing tar sands. So it's got all this extra stuff inside of the pipe to try to push it along, and they heat it up and they water it down. And so it's under incredible pressure. And so there doesn't exist a tar sands pipeline that does not fail. They all eventually will fail because of the intense pressure and heat that goes into it. So, but I think he had a good point that even if it didn't fail, like this is still perpetuating something globally that we can't continue.
Yeah.
Thought it was prescient.
And so then we want to talk a little bit about like how we got there, correct? So
Yours, I think.
Oh.
Yeah, let me leave the computer on. You see yours.
Okay. So how we got there was that we, the Unitarian Universalist Association put out a national call for youth and young adults to come and organize and protest against the pipeline. And we were, at the time, I was taking a spiritual activist program with the Justice Ministry of California. Jolly had just gotten a job with the Justice Ministry of California. And so we accepted free airfare to go out to Minnesota for a week in July and participate in their actions. There wasn't anything specific that we knew at the time. It was very much like, we need more people, we need more bodies. It would be a sort of spiritual journey with our church organization to join in with protest. And so it took 4 organizations for us to be able to take this trip. The Unitarian Universalist Association as a whole has smaller internal organizations that were funding money into this project. So the Line 3 Defense sent out a national call. Our organization heard that national call And we went along with, I want to say 10 other Unitarian Universalists. It was the Unitarian Universalist Ministry for Earth, which focuses on climate justice. The Unitarian Universalist Ministry of California, which is justice and social justice work here in California specifically. The same organization in Arizona, so the Unitarian Arizona Justice Organization, and then the Youth and Young Adults Organization of the UUA. And so I want to say it was like 10 or 15 of us from our small pod met up with another organization that also went, the Black Lives Matter of Metro Phoenix. And of the 20 of us, became this affinity group that discovered that we were going to go to line 3 together. And so a lot of what we can talk about today is only because we have finished the legal process of this trip. And so up until about 2 months ago, we still couldn't talk about like where we were and what we were doing and how it planned out. But now that we've sort of gone through the legal process, it can give you a little bit more information. And so those are the places and people that ended up going with. Jolly and I did not know any of these people personally. We knew each other. And then we and 15 or so other people met in Minneapolis and began doing some trust exercises together, making some posters, because we as activists we thought we were going to go and there might be some sign holding, there might be some yelling, there might be some cops. Like we as LA activists knew exactly what protests look like, and we were ready to go do a protest. And that was the thing that we were going to do. Do you want to add anything before we go to the second part of this?
Did you want me to roll the clip?
Yes. So this is a little bit of actually what happened. We're going to talk about the action that we actually did. And as I say, we thought as LA activists, you guys have seen photos of what activists are doing, even with Standing Rock and somewhat with Treaty Peoples gathering. It's a big group of people, and then you are part of those big group of people, and maybe you get arrested and things are sort of how they are. But we want to give you a clip of what ended up being on the news from the action that we participated in. And this is the trigger warning. This has got some violence and a clear understanding of what we were up against.
Sorry. I'm gonna try to redo the audio. Okay, I just want some thumbs if y'all are able to hear this when it begins. Thanks.
Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. We end today's show in Minnesota, where at least 20 water protectors were brutally arrested over the weekend as resistance to the Enbridge Line 3 pipeline continues. Water protectors say state and local police have escalated their use of excessive force, using tear gas, rubber, and pepper bullets to repress Line 3 protesters. On Sunday, Indigenous lawyer and activist Tara Houska published photos of herself on social media with bloodied welts on her arms after she was shot with rubber bullets during an action last week. Houska and 19 others were held in Pennington County Jail over the weekend, where several water protectors say they were denied medical care for their injuries, were denied proper food, and some were reportedly held in solitary confinement. Well, Tara Houska joins us now for more from the Namuag camp in Minnesota, founder of the Ginu Collective, and is Ojibwe from Couchiching First Nation. Welcome back to Democracy Now!, Tara. Can you describe what happened when you were arrested and the escalation of force that the police are using against you?
Good morning. So in a situation in which there were a number of shutdowns of various drilling operations across several rivers here in northern Minnesota, this would have been the 5th drill shutdown in as many days. And the attempt by water protectors, including myself, to engage in those processes and attempt to protect the river was met with extreme force. We were under smoky skies and a red sun due to the wildfires that are raging in Ontario, just north of us and west of us, and next to a drought-stricken river. So a very, very deeply harmed river, and a gigantic drill in the background drilling through, attempting to put in a tar sands pipeline through that drought-stricken river. And the level of brutality that was unleashed on us was very extreme. People were shot in their faces, in their bodies, in their upper torsos. I saw a young woman's head get split open right in front of me. It was a really, really brutal scene. And the arrests in person were also quite brutal, throwing people face down in the dirt and being extremely violent in a situation in which we were outnumbered by police at least 2 to 1. And many, many, many counties present protecting this one place, in which also happens to be a county where a murderer, an actual murderer, is still on the loose, has not been caught, but there were somehow over 50 police officers in that one place watching water protectors.
And Tara, could you talk about the this increasing cooperation and partnership between Minnesota State and local police and Enbridge?
When I was sitting on the side of a police vehicle with several others waiting to be brought to jail, I overheard several of the police officers talking about how they were going to get bonus time for this brutality they had unleashed upon us. It's at this point a pretty known thing that police officers are reimbursed for any costs associated with Enbridge Line 3 protests, and it seems like they welcome the opportunity. One police officer was actually grinning and smiling and said he had a great time and couldn't wait for us to come again. They've billed over $1.7 million to the Public Safety Escrow Trust, in which Enbridge is dumping millions of dollars to incentivize and encourage police officers to repress, suppress, and surveil, harass Indigenous people and our allies that are helping us try to stop this pipeline from happening in our treaty territory. It is a very clear pattern of aggression and of cooperation that's also being enabled by things like the Energy Security Act that has just passed through the House very recently. So it's a precedent that is very dangerous, and everyone should be afraid of this, regardless of whether or not they're engaged in pipeline protest.
And the latest protest on the Red River came as another spill was reported on the Mississippi River headwaters, where Enbridge has continued to drill despite a temporary halt buffer zone issued by White Earth Nation. What's the latest on the construction of the pipeline and other actions?
Construction is 24 hours a day. Enbridge is working as fast as it possibly can. I'm guessing after police were harming Indigenous people using rubber bullets paid for by the Enbridge company, that there's probably even more of a push to get this done as quickly as possible before the Army Corps intervenes, if that's indeed what they choose to do. There is an ongoing call out to the Army Corps, to the Biden administration, to intervene before more people are hurt, before more frack outs happen at the Mississippi River headwaters, the place where the Mississippi River, one of the biggest river systems in the world, begins. There have been a number of spills just in that one location and several others along the 200 water bodies that are proposed to be impacted by Line 3, the 800 wetlands that this project wants to go through.
Tara, we just showed the images that you put out, just even of yourself with the rubber bullet welts on your arms. If you could describe why you're doing this. I mean, we're seeing progressives in Congress, they're fighting hard. You are putting your bodies on the line. And what message do you have for Washington now as they fight over this infrastructure bill, these two bills? What you're doing, what you want them to know about Minnesota, about the Gino Collective camp, and how you've been blockaded there by the police?
I began my own professional career in Washington, D.C., and understand a lot of how the dynamics of Capitol Hill work. I worked in various offices, including the White House, when I was out there. And It is so clear to me and to the many young people who are part of not just this movement, but movements across the globe, the Indigenous people who are leading struggle to protect the last beautiful sacred places, that it is simply not working fast enough. In the conversations and arguments that are very based in status quo, in this idea that we will continue on in the way that we have always done things, and that it is simply a matter of transitioning into another form of energy economy, that is not reflective of what is actually happening. We should understand that as the last time I spoke with you, there was an entire city that had been burned to the ground from wildfires that are directly related to climate crisis. The climate crisis is happening. And for myself, if it takes seeing Indigenous bodies being brutalized to understand what is really occurring in real time, what is happening to the people as we are defending these last places, that's what I'm willing to do. And that's what many, many others are willing to do. I was just one of many people who were hurt. I was put in solitary confinement. I was denied medical care after being hospitalized when I got brought in. We as human beings have to decide what we're going to do. And some of us are pushing as hard as we can with everything that we can.
Tara Haskell, we want to thank you so much for being with us, Indigenous lawyer and activist, founder of the Ginu Collective, Ojibwe from the Cochiching First Nation, speaking to us from Minnesota, where she was just recently arrested, hospitalized, put in solitary confinement, and now out, brutalized with police shooting rubber bullets at her. That does it for our show.
Yeah, so as you can see, Tara Haskell has been in this fight for quite some time, quite a bit longer than I have. I was not really actually familiar with who that person was. If you are one of these people who's ever had an experience where you have an interaction with a famous person and then you realize later, who that was, I had a bit of a celebrity moment there. If you are one of the people who was covering your eyes watching through the police brutality, I completely understand. If you're one of the people that was watching more closely, you might have seen they really zoomed in on the part where they grabbed me by the shoulder and tossed my face into the mud. They played that a few times. Hat. I was the one wearing a wide-brimmed hat, and I don't know. I could tell it was me.
So talk a little bit more about the violent part of what you went through in your arrest and the damage it did.
Okay. So here, would it be, it might be better for you to do yours. Let me mute mine first though. There, that way, in case someone is using the side-by-side speaker view, then it'll at least show our images. Okay. So as far as what actually happened, what actually took place in the action, as you can see, we're in full camo, right? We were taking indigenous leadership. You saw earlier in the clip from the Necessity movie, they were doing things in a very white way, right? Very overt. We're going to put on safety vests. We're going to walk up in broad daylight and just, take control of things. But we were there not to do things in kind of the white way. We were going to take leadership from them. And so instead, we were very secretive about who we were working with and where we were going to be and at what time. And we were wearing camouflage. And as you saw, we came up with these ladders. And the plan was allegedly to climb over some of these fences and chain ourselves to some of the drilling equipment in order to stop the production physically. Earlier in that same day, another group of indigenous folks had allegedly come up and parked an SUV in front of the gate to this location, slashed all the tires, and then all handcuffed themselves in to this SUV to prevent entry and exit. And so a lot was happening. So already there were a lot of foot cops there before we even showed up.
One of the things that's an important piece to know is that the pipeline there was a fence, 2 fences actually, where the pipeline was, but the pipeline was actually right against the treaty camp that people were living at. So it would be as if this pipeline were your next door neighbor through your backyard. And so people were living there, families,
There's
children,
a 6-year-old child, I believe. There's elders.
living in this space, and they are pushing this pipeline through and rerouting it so that they were blocking people from getting to a space that actually already belonged to them. And so part of this action was in that space right over the fence of where people were living. And it was a very, there were so many cops. So one of the things that I did during this action is I was actually on jail support. I was not interested in being arrested in the middle of Minnesota as a Black woman. And so I decided to do the kind of thing where I wouldn't have to be arrested, which was to keep track of people who were at the action, make sure that if anybody was arrested, that they had a phone call and that they were able to get the things that they needed from jail if they were incarcerated, and to keep up with all of our people, make sure that they had medications, make sure that they got to contact their families, all of that stuff. I was on the outside the entire time, making sure that those were the pieces that were getting done. We had a team. Unfortunately, I had to use all of that time making sure that this person got all the things that he needed because he was incarcerated. And so that's a little bit about how our team as a partnership works, is that Jolly was on the inside, I was on the outside. A lot of what people don't realize is that going through this system, going through something as an action as big as this, when you are arrested, it is not a catch and release, right? It's not a, oh, we noticed that you're activists and you're protesters and you get released at the end of the day. This was very punitive and vindictive. This action happened on a Thursday evening.
Can I take it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to say that one of the ways that you can tell whether something is popular is how much violence is required to perpetuate it. Okay, like, I mean, it's clear. I mean, from the clip, right? It's clear that that this is violating treaties. That in 1853 or something, year of our Lord, the Indigenous folks signed a treaty with white people saying, you know, we're not going to blow you to kingdom come, and you get to live here, hunt here, fish here, and gather wild rice. And so this pipeline directly endangers that treaty and those freedoms that they've been given. In the clip that had Tara Housegood there just now, she was saying that $1.7 million had been funneled from the Enbridge petrobillionaires into the police in Minnesota in order to keep this going. That has since increased to $4 million that they've put into this shell account, a public safety account, I think it is, which the police have then been able to use for overtime and for rubber bullets and for pepper spray for them to shoot at Indigenous people on their land. When we approached, the police were more than ready to play with their brand new toys. The first clip I showed talked about the necessity defense and needing to do things because the alternative is that you are in real and present danger. When I arrived at this area, before I stepped foot, they were already shooting rubber bullets at me. I caught a couple to my shoulder. The first one that actually hit me was to my goggles. And so this tells me that they are not using these the way that LAPD understands the way you're supposed to use crowd suppression tactics. They were shooting to kill. There's no need to aim at someone's head 0% of the time. So I was taking rubber bullets literally to my head without a helmet on. I received more than a can of pepper spray to my back. They really came out in full violence and force. I heard also a couple cops talking about how they had been putting them up at a hotel nearby. And one guy, they were remarking, hey, you're back. You know, he had just finished his shift, gotten back to the hotel. And then they said, oh, hey, you can come back in for some overtime if you want. So he suited right back up and came right back out.
So I want to pause
Sorry.
you because I think that you actually buried the lead here.
You're right.
So part of this is to say how violent they were, but part of the violence comes in with like the aftermath of what we have had to deal with since July. Jolly received a massive concussion. So this is someone now that is still dealing with post-concussion syndrome based on going and protecting the waters and how violent the police were at that action. That action was noted as one of the most violent that has happened since. That was the first time they had used, that was the first time that they had used this kind of weaponry against protesters. That was, yes, go on.
Yeah, I was the last protester they plucked off the land. When we say, you know, taking punitive measures, right? Yeah, I was admitted to the jail. I was literally unable to speak, stand up straight. I was slurring my words. I said I need to go to a hospital. And instead what they did is they denied me my prescription medication. And I even read through the rules and knew that if I don't bring my own, then I might not get the medication. I take 2 different pills every day. And I'm like, if I don't have this, it's going to be bad for me. So if you can imagine, you know, being denied hospital care and then also being told, oh yeah, we threw all your pills away, you know, and you're not going to get your medication. And we did this action thinking that, you know, I knew that wasn't going to be booked and released, but I thought they were going to keep us overnight to teach us a lesson. And what they decided to do was to keep us over the weekend. Instead of taking us to court on Friday, they took us to court on Monday. So actually I was in there for 100 hours like this.
Yeah. And then you were released on Monday.
And then I was released on Monday. I was told to sign a thing and I couldn't read it. I felt like an Indigenous person under a gun, you know?
So
all
I think
the
that
words are swimming. Sorry.
So that goes to like the aftermath of what we've been dealing with and what we've decided to do because of it, which is the next slide.
Yeah. So
part of it is that one of the things that we don't talk a lot about, which I wish that we did, was sort of the healing and process that comes after being a frontline worker, right? We've all gone through doing frontline action, and burnout is one of the things that they talk about a lot, right? Like you're doing too much or you're signing up for too many things. But this was much deeper than burnout, right? This was a physical and mental trauma of being followed by the police all week, having your cars marked, feeling that you could be arrested on site anywhere you were in the vicinity of a pipeline, not even just at an action, but simply driving around with out-of-state plates or an out-of-state driver's license. This was the concern of not making it home to your family because you were shot in the head with rubber bullets, right? So this is the kind of physical and mental trauma that a lot of faith communities don't prepare their activists for. We have, you know, we see the images from the civil rights era, or we talk about watching, you know, pastors in their stoles and they calmly get arrested and they sit overnight in jail and then they get released. But we as spiritual activists went on what I've been calling a mission trip, and we came home and had to rebuild ourselves, basically. This was a very traumatic event for both of us, whether one of us was in jail or not. And so we started to try to find ways in which to reconnect both with our community here and partly with the community there at Line 3, because we were only there for a week, and they continued to protest and, you know, work against this pipeline for months later. I believe that it was completed in
October.
In October, right?
Yeah,
So it was
what was your
completed.
interface?
It was completed in October, meaning that they continued to say, please stop doing this, please stop doing this, in as many ways as they could, as we sat at home and tried to recover. And by recover, I'll give you some examples of what I learned to be post-concussion syndrome. You can't drive, you can barely write, you have to reteach yourself how to read. Walking and riding in cars for long distances is difficult. What were some other things that we had to renegotiate? It was really just a relearning. I'm saying this as the perspective of watching your partner go through this, but relearning how your body works and the things that you can and can't do. I personally had to take time away from doing activist work for a couple of months, because you would do a thing and you would realize that as an activist, a lot of the work that you were already doing is somewhat traumatic. We work in the unhoused, I was going to say business, but that's really the wrong word. Working with unhoused people who have various levels of trauma, and then being someone who had been recently traumatized is a challenging way to do your job. And so one of the things that we wanted to do is to try and navigate, how can we as spiritual activists, how can we as activists in general, refill our cups so that we can do the work ongoing? Because throwing people into the frontline work and then pulling back from them personally doesn't get you more frontline workers, right? It gets you injured or damaged activists. And I think that this is a problem across all faiths, or even those who are not part of faith communities, right? We've gone to protest before, you show up, you go home, you go back to your lives. And so one of the things that we were able to do was to connect with a minister who lives in Fargo, who is part of the Standing Rock movement. And she had also been arrested for Line 3 protest. And we talked a lot about our own experiences in Minnesota. She talked a little bit about her experiences and what other people had been going through. I met 2 or 3 other activists who had gone to pipeline work and had sort of been mentally damaged enough that they had to step away from a lot of their activist things. And so what we want to do, what we want to help invigorate, is to bring spiritual connection to activist work, whether they're frontline workers or not, so that people have a sense of grounding when they do these things that are hard. And so activist work isn't going to get easier the longer we do it, right? The police are getting more violent. The damage to the earth is becoming more intense. We are in the stages of late stage capitalism. Everything is at its worst. And so the longer that we have to live in this system at its worst, the more violent and the more traumatic it's going to be for those of us who participate, whether it's frontline or whether it's not. I see you've raised your hand. I'd love to answer your question. And so one of the things I've discovered is this really great organization. I want to say it's called Faith Matters, and they have a class that I'm a part of called Movement Chaplaincy. And it really is the idea of bringing spiritual healing to movement work and activists. It's basically a chaplain for frontline workers. And it's someone who both understands what it means to be on the front lines, whether that's protests, pipelines, even in unhoused work, right? Being caseworkers, being housing navigators, that's frontline work. And that can be challenging. And so having someone who understands that piece of it, but also is there to provide spiritual guidance in real time. Protesters and chaplains at protest or at these pipeline works, provide spiritual guidance in real time so that people can have a sense of grounding continuously as they do this frontline action. And so creating spiritual and healing connections through various movement organizations would be something that I aspire to, and also something that I would put on your radar as you work in your organization. I want to pause and see if Jolly has any other thoughts about this and would like to add anything.
No, I was just trying to find links or images or something like that.
No worries.
I mean, yeah, the point is that there's mental trauma. There is absolutely physical trauma too. I don't know. These are punitive measures. Like it's insane the amount of harm people have to put others through to perpetuate these terrible things. And I don't know that we're going to defeat all the evil in your lifetime or in mine. So we have to find ways to be resilient.
And I think that one of the ways that people forget that they can be resilient, whether they are religious or not, is that spiritual aspect of things. And so I've met lots of people who do activist work who say that they're not spiritual or religious people, but will have a conversation with you and let you pray with them or speak to what they find to be their grounding and guiding light. And they will find care in those moments because that's what our spirit needs. And so I would love to, as I said, connect deeper with faith organizations who are already doing justice work to, my brain popped.
To do that.
Well, mostly it's great knowing that talking to you guys, that you're already in the aspect of spiritual justice work, right? And part of that is to create spaces for frontline activists to participate in that spiritual justice work at an action. I don't know if you've ever participated or seen the start of a protest from BLM LA. Has anybody ever been to a BLM LA protest or seen,
There's
right?
a few hands.
And the first thing that they do, right? The first thing that they do is they call in their ancestors. They call in their ancestors. They honor those that have died. They turn off. They oh my goodness. They talk about the people in the community that have been lost, right? And then, only then have they done those spiritual steps to connect you to them. Do they say, all right, let's go, right? And so when I was joining BLMLA marches in 2020, having been a spiritual person, but not doing spiritual activism, those pieces of the march felt like church. That is when I felt most connected to doing the work and knowing that we were connected to everybody that was in the area and that we would be held by both the movement work and the spiritual work of being together. And so I implore you that as this organization grows and in the communities that you're each a part of, to have conversations about what that would look like for your organizations to work spiritually and connect with activists who are looking to find more holistic ways of honoring the trauma that they've gone through and these frontline actions. And so that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Antoinette. As somebody who saw you going to Minnesota, saw you coming back, I hadn't realized quite what you went through there, but amazing. What we do is just a control thing, basically. If people want to ask questions, comment, they will put their hands up in the on the screen, and I will call them, in the order the hand goes up. And Michael Novick, who I know is a great champion of BLM, is the first one who wishes to speak. So, Michael.
Yeah, we were just, Eva and I were up there again Wednesday for the vigil, and I think that is very accurate, that it is a spiritually uplifting experience to go out there. So, I support that. I wanted to comment about something completely different, which was the contrast between the treatment you got and what's happening now in Canada, which I think is very related, which is that people are probably aware of this occupation basically that's going on in Ottawa, the capital of Canada. And the people who initiated that are primarily people from Alberta, and they're involved in secessionist white nationalist activity in Canada. And they're being treated with kid gloves. They've blockaded the bridge between Canada and the United States that ended up shutting down the Ford plant, and yet they're being treated completely with kid gloves, and people in the state security forces are actually involved in the strategic planning of that action. And I think it's a contrast that shows the significance of basically organized white supremacy to maintaining this system of land theft and genocide that you're talking about, and that the lengths to which the state is prepared to use violence against you, on the other hand, the lengths to which the state is willing to allow white supremacist forces to disrupt the functioning of the empire, even to maintain that white supremacist ideology and consciousness, I think is really, really significant difference. So I just wanted to point that out, that the state is very, very strategic in its use of the kind of violence you're talking about, as to who they direct it at and who they use kid gloves on. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, also, as you're probably aware as well, the Royal Canadian, the RCMP, they're also pretty brutal to Indigenous folks. Actually, the inclination that I got from folks was that you definitely don't want to tangle with the Canadian police, even more so than what was happening in America. But again, that was before they were like shooting at us, but they were saying that the RCMP would like go to people that were just blocking a road, blocking a street, and they like flash their rifles around, and like you want to talk about violence, yeah, it was there too. You're completely right. It has nothing to do with nationality. It all has to do with, which side are you on?
And I think too, when they think they can get away with it in these more remote areas, when they think that only they are watching, I think that also could be one of those things, because we were in remote areas, and we were around people that have been living off the land, and so they had all of these stories of the kind of violence that the police were able to commit.
It's not a secret to that.
Versus the truckers at the border, or even the difference between being an urban protester and watching the insurrection, right? Like, you could totally, it depends on how many eyes are on you and what people are willing to do if they think they can get away with it.
Yeah. Carol Francis.
Thank you so very much for all of this and for your work. And by the way, I love both of your t-shirts. I want to ask about the popular support in the area, and do people around there know what's going on and what side are they on? I was really amazed about this, people cutting down going in there and filming and everything, cutting down the means of shutting it down, and getting the to use the defense of necessity, because I don't know how many protests that, including a few I've been on, but they raised the defense and necessity and it's denied. Is this because they lucked out and got a humane judge, or is this because of support that people have? And it seems to me that being able to raise the defense of necessity is crucial.
So there are two questions there, right? The first one is, were the people around the pipeline, like the people that lived in the cities, if they were supportive or not? There were a couple of places where you might see someone that had a bumper sticker that said stop line 3, but for the most part, when we were in the major cities like Grand Rapids, Thief Rivers Falls, goodness.
You don't need to name all the geographic locations.
Well,
of
I'm
where
just
everything
saying
took
these,
place,
no,
right?
no, no.
Hush,
Well,
hush.
I'm talking about the little tiny towns that
Yeah.
were near, that are on a map that are there. Most of the people, I won't say most of the people, there were billboards that were like, support Enbridge, support the pipeline, because the pipeline brought jobs for people in these areas where there were not a lot of jobs. So yes, there was support for the pipeline. And yes, there were a couple of billboards where you would see stop line 3, this is Indigenous land. And so I would say that there were probably more support for the pipeline based on the economics around it, and a loud minority of people begging for it to be stopped because of the environmental implications.
If there was a white person that you met in Minnesota, you could make a bet and put money on it that they supported the pipeline. And that's because in these small ass towns in the middle of nowhere, every person that you meet has some family member or someone that they know who is tied financially directly to this fossil fuel infrastructure. So every cop that I met with, every correctional officer that I met with, every convenience store clerk, you know, any person that you just interact with, even on just a very like intangible level, like you can bet that if they have skin that looks like mine, they probably support these petrobillionaires completely.
I can also say that being a Black person in Minnesota, at least in these areas, I stuck out really well. So people didn't really engage with me anyway. I mean, and I wasn't wearing like stop line 3 garb. I was just like going to the store.
They like wouldn't make eye contact or something, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I mean, it is really
funny.
hard. You had an additional question.
It was about the necessity defense.
Yeah.
And so I want to address that a little bit. When I said that I was being shot at before I even climbed a fence, literally when I climbed a fence, allegedly, I did so actually to take cover. And my lawyer thought that my public defender was aware that necessity defense, just as an overall the climate, was not going to fly. And that even the necessity defense of me stopping myself being shot at immediately right this moment was not a strong enough defense. And so because of that, I pled out. I pled guilty. And so that really broke my heart to do so. But what that does mean is that now if my criminal case is over, that now I can at least share my story, which is nice. But I received a gross misdemeanor for trespass on a critical utility or pipeline, and a misdemeanor of obstruction of the legal process. And even, you know, that they were willing to put me in jail for another 90 days for trespassing on a pipeline that was not even operational, just under construction. And that the necessity defense would not hold up in court for even that. I will have to say that the county where mine took place it had a lot less pipeline resistance activity than some of the other counties did. So the treaty people that went in June or something, like 100 people got arrested in one day. And so like they are having to deal with like huge implications. Where I went, ours was the biggest group, I think, with like 20.
So like,
what am I saying?
No. So like Standing Rock, you know, was one location. Line 3 was not one location. Line 3 was various locations along the pipeline route that were resistance camps. And so it became more difficult to gather that like people power in the same way they had for Standing Rock. so that that they could use that resistance. And so, yeah, having 20 people for an action was actually really big comparatively to what they had been doing before we got there.
It's a really good point. It's not like a single location that you can block the construction of, because it's all along like miles and miles and miles. So, and they resisted it every fucking step of the way, but
I hope
Thank you.
that's the question.
yeah, I hope
Anthony?
Well, I'm just so impressed by the two of you, and I just love your spirit and your the way you've shared this with such integrity, and I love the spirituality behind your work. I think that's what sustains us all in the long haul. I think you mentioned something about the spirituality of Black Lives Matter. Did you have any experience with the Indigenous people that you work with? Were there prayers or any spiritual preparation that came from that group that was involved?
Yes, please do talk about the intersection of Indigenous people and Black Lives Matter groups.
I want to say yes and no. So where we were, like I said, there were various camps, and where we ended up landing was a camp that had Indigenous people, but I won't say was ultimately ran by locals. So because there was this national call for people to come, most of the people at the camp that we ended up staying at was mostly white people. And so this was a piece that was a little awkward for me, that there was like Indigenous space at this camp. There was a POC spot that only people of color could go into and white people couldn't, but for the most part, all hands on deck were mostly white people. And so for me personally, no, I did not have any real Indigenous connection or prayers before the action. It was very, but I also think that's because it was very secretive and shrouded in security culture, which I'm not quite sure if that's a phrase that people understand or have heard. Mostly that's a need to know kind of thing. So you don't give your location, you don't give your, most people didn't even give their real names. You only get told the small piece of information that you need to know to take care of your job. And so as jail support, I did not know where the action was. I didn't know who was going to go. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what time it was. I was hours away from it, actually, and then would find out more and more as the day went on. So I think that had there been, even just with the Unitarian Universalists that were there in that space, I think we had spent more time trying to connect to the land while we were there, because we did like a day or two before we got to camp, right? When you're at church camp, you sing all the songs and you do all the things, and then you go on the mission, and then you'd forget to do all of that while you're there. And that's sort of what I feel happened. We didn't cement our spiritual selves in that space.
We expected them to lead that, and so we stopped leading it, because
Yeah.
we were told it would be big colonizer energy for us to come and like into an Indigenous space and assert our religious shit,
Well,
so we were kind of waiting for them, or at least in my case.
yeah, but we didn't have it because each camp was less of a religious space and more of an action space.
Okay. Thank you. Stephen Fisk?
Question. Oh, you're muted.
Oh, we can't hear you, Stephen.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. I'm so sorry. Sometimes you forget the buttons. Thank you for your activism and your hard-fought diligence in this. I just want to draw a little bit of a contrast between an action that I participated in for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which was a 600-mile pipeline that was proposed to run through West Virginia, and down to North Carolina with frack gas to be pumped out, to boats in the Chesapeake Bay and brought over to Europe primarily. And the pipeline was not benefiting the local folks, although the Dominion and Duke oil companies were promising that they were going to, build community centers and so forth. And some of these communities that were indigenous, that were poor white, they weren't building the pipeline through, affluent communities. But what happened was a great coalition came together, including indigenous people, community organizations, and a large legal fund was raised. And Dominion and Duke eventually backed out of the building of this pipeline. So it was a victory. And I participated in a rally and action. I was invited as a performer. And Al Gore was there and William Barber was there. So Reverend William Barber. So you really had a large coalition of hundreds and thousands of people that amassed to protest. And you guys were out there in a group of 20 people. And I'm wondering, in your call, your national call, that somehow you like in remote areas that didn't have the kind of backing that the Atlantic Coast Pipeline protest had, and which resulted in these mega oil companies backing down from the building of the pipeline. So what do we need to do? So what now? How can we build the kind of coalition that was effective in stopping the Atlantic Coast Pipeline? How can we build that kind of coalition in these remote areas where the mindset is so, the support.
Yeah, it's money. Right? Part of it, I think, is people having the money to go to these things, right? Like I didn't have the money to go. My trip was paid for by the Unitarian Universalist Association. And then last week, we went back to Minnesota for court stuff and they paid for that. But if you can't afford to stop everything that you're doing, to go to a national call, right, then you'll keep your job and your regular wherever you live.
We were lucky to be in a place in our career where we can leave our job for a week and go and do this. And, in
a remote area.
Yeah, in a remote area. There were quite a few. I mean, so there were a lot of young people. People who were taking time off from college, people who lived in Minneapolis and were driving back and forth. It's about 5 hours from Minneapolis to this pipeline area. People who had just decided that they were going to go protest the pipeline. And so they were living at the camp for however long they wanted to, right?
I've worked in volunteer organizations for a lot of time. And most of the time, as you all in this room probably know, a lot of the time when you're in a volunteer org, all the other volunteers are senior citizens. They're all people who are retired and have the time to be there. And the feeling that I got from being at this pipeline thing is it was quite the opposite, that it was young people who had no other alternatives, that saw the real catastrophe happening. And they didn't have economic prospects in the first place. And, we're not putting money in our retirement accounts because we won't have anywhere to retire to. So
I'm not putting money in my retirement account because I'm paying my bills.
We're not having children because there's not a place to have their children, so like, this is something that is totally changing our whole entire lives. I think that 20 years ago, you wouldn't have seen this many young people there.
And I think to respond to you, Stephen, too, with the money piece, is that there aren't organizations funding these kinds of things in a way that outfunds the pipeline.
Petrobillionaires.
So, I mean, now Enbridge has so much money, right? Like millions of dollars just to pay for private security and local police, not to do anything else, but just simply to pay for private security for their pipeline.
They're not paying for private security. Actually,
Well,
that's a point of
to
contention.
pay for the police officers.
The state of Minnesota and the counties thereof are their relationship is eroding with Enbridge because Enbridge has all this money where they could pay for private security, and instead they're using like public resources like the police. But they have the money to, is the point. And I think that, Stephen, that you did everything but say the exact words of what it is that is keeping this the case, and it's capitalism. You know, the problem is, as long as there is a profit motive like that, and we let people continue to have sacrifice zones so that someone else can have a profit motive, this is going to continue.
Well, now, Biden stopped the Keystone Pipeline construction. What's the state of the construction for Line 3 there?
Line 3 was completed in October, and Biden was allowed to stop it himself as well. For Biden to stop a pipeline, literally all he has to do is sign a piece of paper, I swear to God. And right now we're fighting Line 5, for the record, if you want to write a letter.
Yeah, so they're just on to the next one.
On to the next.
Yeah, okay, Ruby, Dr. Ruby.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I am just so interested. I've been doing a lot of just this type of work for years and marching, and right now my body isn't so into the marches. So I've been wondering what I could do. And I'm looking at this problem and being from Colorado, and then also having participated in Arizona, I was never really given the problems because I was always working with the positive on the side of the Indigenous people. So how can we get this out so people really know what's really going on? And I don't see these things that are happening with just Minnesota. I think there's a lot of things happening in the other parts of this country, and we need to bring this out. What is it that we can do as seniors that are not out on the marches so much anymore physically?
I think there's like a lot of pieces to this, right? Is it there's so much going on that we are inundated with these issues, right? Like the way in which capitalism and white supremacy culture sort of makes these all pieces that feel really big and really heavy, and then they throw it at you over and over again, and it wears you down. And so I think that the first part of that, right, is to continue to stay engaged with these things. So you guys have this meeting every week, and so you're engaged in a new piece of social justice work, and part of it is just to stay engaged, right, is now to know there's Line 5 and that Indigenous people are working to stop that, but to use the platforms that you have to spread that message out. Is here's what's happening, here's the the things that are happening. And so something like the no-knock warrant that happened to Amir Locke last week, I don't know if you guys heard about that, but that the Minnesota police engaged in a no-knock warrant and killed someone in their home last Wednesday. We happened to be in Minnesota. We didn't know it at the time.
Be in Minneapolis. For my court hearing.
And so part of it is just being able to amplify these ongoing traumatic events so that people know that they're happening, and put pressure on Congress people and local governments and things like that.
That's right.
I understand that you are doing a lot of work, but I see that this just isn't, I see this as a national part that needs to be taken care of. You know, when you say the environment and the different things, there are people who are concerned specifically in putting together positive ways of the change. I don't see it just as the Caucasians now. I mean, there was a time when you had the nations, everybody was against each other. But right now, we're interested in this world, really. You know, not just blowing itself up or the children learning the police just coming in and just using guns on people. But what I'm thinking, do you have different areas where people that can work in specific things and be participated in this?
Yeah.
You know, because you have a lot of work there just in this one area, environment. When you say environment, this is the world.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
well, actually, that's a really great question. Let me touch to this. So earlier, Antoinette had mentioned how she had a different role in this action than I did. You know, because I came into this trip with, you know, a different identity than she has, where perhaps, you know, cops might not treat her as poorly as they might treat her. And so she had an entirely different function. And, you know, when we went and we stayed at camp, there were some people who were unable to go out onto the front lines that day. Maybe they already had a felony charge in another county from an earlier action. And so now they're relegated to, I'll be the one to cook for everybody. And so I guess the point is that everyone has a thing that they can do, and they have a place where they are. And so I hate to presume, but do you have grandchildren or children?
Yeah, I have grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But
great-grandchildren.
But what I'm seeing is there's people just like me that are interested. And it's like, just like Jim Lawson, he has a meeting every week. And I found out with the nations a lot of times that they're hiding things or they're keeping things in certain areas, and it's not getting out. So you don't know until after it's happened and it's too late. So how come, is there groups that don't have that fear? Is there a group that can bring everything out and say, hey, we need to work on this now before it happens?
If it's Indigenous work, I'm gonna be honest and say I'm not quite sure. But I will say that one of the things that y'all can do, like that you probably can do personally, is that y'all are faith leaders, right? Like you guys are in this world of various churches and temples. And one of the things that we're missing from this work is ways to check in with our faith community. And so I'm wondering if that is something that people who are retired and at home can be sort of the check, like someone to
well, yeah
connect to.
Tag me in. So what a faith
that sounds great.
So what a faith community needs, among other things, a faith community needs elders. And by that I don't mean old people. I mean people who are wise and people who can provide advice and comfort in a way that other members of the community don't really have access to. And by comfort, I mean, like, I don't know, maybe you've got, I know that my mother makes the best pie. And like, that is something that's really comforting to me. Or like, maybe you're a grandmother who makes, you know how your children feel about your cookies, right? Food is a huge part of comfort. Or maybe you're one of these who knits and you're able to keep people warm, right? Like there is some way that you're
I've been out, and I'm one that's been out in the streets.
Yeah.
So, and not everybody wants to do that now.
Right.
So I'm looking at a way to tie everything together without going out into the streets. And you know, it could be PR, public relations.
Yeah.
How can get people interested without fear? Or saying, oh no, I'm too old or I'm too tired to do this and stuff. How can you get groups, and I'm talking about all nationalities coming together, because that's why I'm here with ICUJP.
Ruby, I think this would be a great discussion for us as a group. We're getting a little short on time now, and I've still got a couple of hands up. Okay. Can we kind of table this? I think it's a great discussion, and maybe, Steve could put it on our agenda, because I think it's very important.
Okay, and I want to thank Stephen Fisk too, because he was saying that he said a lot of things I was going to say.
Right. We have 2 people left, I think, unless other hands have gone up. Dave Clennon, Michael again, and Lucy. And if you can keep your question fairly short, and we may have to combine them just because we're running out of time. Thanks. So Dave, you go first. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. I'm very grateful to both of you for going to the front line and fighting for us. And it seems to me that there are a couple of other pieces to this problem. As Stephen Fisk talked about the success on the East Coast, and I think 2 of the elements in that success were celebrity, having someone like Al Gore on your side, and money, the funding for the legal struggle. And it sounds to me like you folks did not have that in Minnesota. So one of the things I'm thinking about is how you can marshal those forces on your side. But the main thing I wanted to talk about, the main piece, and this may be a future ICUJP question, how can we learn to use less energy ourselves so that at some point the pipelines become unnecessary because there is no market for the product that the pipelines are transporting? That is a question doesn't need to be answered today, but perhaps in a future ICUJP setting. But I would also be interested to see if our guests have any thoughts about how we, who can't go to Minnesota next week, can help the struggle by decreasing the demand for the product that is poisoning the indigenous lands and all the lands around it.
Okay, can I ask for one clarification about the protests and the treaty that you guys were talking about in Virginia? Who was going to be most harmed by that pipeline?
Well, it was communities stretching through a 600-mile pipeline from West Virginia through Virginia and down into North Carolina. So there was a multiple number of communities, including indigenous and Black communities, as well as poor white communities, that this was going through. And a coalition formed, including Sierra Club and indigenous people and various communities, and a tremendous support for the legal front.
Yeah.
The ability to bring together a coalition of legal fighters, lawyers, was very much a part of it.
So I think part of it is that the demographics are different.
Yeah.
I think that because it seems like the only people who are harmed are indigenous people, that there isn't a national rallying call around this.
Right.
And I think that's part of it. The other piece is that the financial piece for like lawyers and bails and stuff like that for what's going on now, the Line 3 Legal Defense Fund does exist, and it has been providing money and funding to people who are going through the legal system now in Pennington County and Hubbard County and those small areas. And so if you want to donate money to the Line 3 Defense Fund, that was helpful. That allowed us to go back to Minnesota last week and be able to afford a rental car and hotels and pay for the plea deal that you had to take, those kinds of things. So that does exist. But I think part of it is just that the communities that are harmed are just Indigenous people. And I say that as to mean it only seems like it, right? Like, we're all harmed the longer these pipelines exist. The communities of white people that live there are also harmed. They just need money to survive. And so they want to, you know, have a job that builds these pipelines. And so again, I would say that in these organizations that you guys are all a part of, amplifying these national calls and amplifying this information, staying in touch with what's going on, because a lot of it is just that news moves so fast, right? Like, I was in high school when 9/11 happened. So for me, post 9/11 is the world that I've lived in, but like the news moves so fast, is that every day is a brand new traumatic event and it's huge. And so we forget the traumatic event that happened the day before. And so I think that just continuing to amplify these things is going to be the best way that we can
using the court system through smart legal strategies made all the difference.
Can I cut in now? We have 3 hands up, and I'm going to ask the 3 of you just to make it really small, because we are really getting short on time. So it'll be Michael, then Lucy, then Steve, not Fisk, the other Steve. So Michael, can you make yours kind of a concise comment or?
Yeah, well, briefly, I wanted to point out again the contrast to this thing happening in Canada, where they have had millions and millions of dollars pouring in, and they got all this publicity from the Fox network, which is the most popular cable news channel that Tucker Carlson compared to this. I think that just to say that Pacifica, the clip we saw was democracy now. So I think that trying to develop our own media channels and our own financial support along the lines that she just said is very, very important as far as what people can do. And that just want to invite you, Jolly and Antoinette. I put in the chat this thing we're doing for Anti-Racist Action Sunday. If you want to come on the call and share some of this, you'd be quite welcome to do so. Pacific is trying to start a national show of Indigenous environmentalism. The national board just approved a motion that Lydia Ponce from here in Los Angeles put forward for such a show, and I think that that's the kind of information channel that we can help get this word out on. Thank you.
Thank you. Lucy?
I would just like to respond to what Ruby said. As a senior citizen, I heard that prayer is a verb. I love that saying. And if we can pray, I think Antoinette and Jolly mentioned that when you're out in the fog of war, so to speak, the spiritual connection is hard to maintain. And knowing that people are praying, I think can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. And now to our chairperson.
Well, I'm delighted to be able to thank you guys. I have a very specific action item. You're in touch with Morgan Tucker, our communications director, who sent you the invitation and organized your appearance here today. Please send her a freestanding appeal to support the Legal Defense Fund and the work that you're involved in. If you send that to us, we will endorse it. We will send it out to our mailing list. As long as what you give us has the links and all the details directly of how people can support this work. We will promote that, post it and send it. And I cannot express enough our gratitude for your work, that you wake up every morning to do this kind of work locally and elsewhere. And you're certainly welcome to respond to the last few questions and express a few closing thoughts.
Yeah, thanks. I will definitely try and remember. I'll have Rose poke at me to remember to send Morgan information. I agree with you, Lucy, that knowing that people care about you when you're doing these frontline things is really helpful. When we went back this past week, 2 people from our church community gave us winter clothing and gloves, because I grew up in Florida and now I live in LA. I didn't own winter clothing to go to Minnesota in February and like 0-degree weather. So that's the key, right? Like having people in your community that you know are hoping you come home and thinking about you and praying for you when you are on these scary nights. And I want you to very quickly like 2 seconds, talk about what you did in jail to keep what'd you do mentally so that you knew you could get out of jail?
Suffered mainly.
No. Quickly.
So meditation, like visualizing back to the time when I was in the water of Mississippi, and coming back to the reason that I was there. Someone earlier had said that prayer is a verb, and I grew up Baptist. We would say that we pray with our hands, like we pray by doing. And so for me, like that was like, okay, service is our prayer, right? This is the prayer that we had. And so like, why are we doing this? That there is no therapy like action.
And also knowing that that people would be holding you when you got out of jail also helped you get through jail. That is the thing you said.
I knew that my community was going to need to be there for me.
We asked to put our information in the chat.
Thank you so much. I mean, I have learned so much, and I thought I knew you both. What we do now in our meeting is, if there are any announcements that are not to do with ICUJP, other announcements, this is the time for that. And then we have, and I hope you'll stay for that, a closing circle. When we met as a group, we used to stand in a circle and actually hold hands. Now we have to kind of either do this or just pretend, just to remember people. And because, as you have noticed, and as you're always reminding me, Antoinette, that we're old, we often have people that, we have to remember for particular reasons. So I will now open it to any announcements for organizations outside ICUJP, any activities or anything happening or coming up.
I did put in the chat again the link for Sunday Anti-Racist Action 35th anniversary event and 75th birthday celebration for me. And people are welcome to join us on Zoom 4 to 7 p.m. Also, just to mention again that KPFK is in fund drive for February, and if you can support the Pacifica station here, that would be advantageous to what we're talking about, trying to get the word out. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay.
Dave has a hand up there.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that. Let me get back to looking. Okay. Dave Clennon?
This was a group action. I just want to put this in as a news item. ICUJP co-sponsored an action last Saturday at the West Side Federal Building, an anti-war action to prevent war with Russia, to prevent war in Europe. ICUJP co-sponsored that action, and Michael Novick and Carol Francis Likens were present that day. It was Prayer is Action, and I'm glad that ICUJP was part of it. It felt, the being there felt good, and I think that the activity was useful and worthwhile. Thanks.
Thank you. Carol Francis?
I just want to remind everybody about the meeting, and right after this, we'll take a 5-minute break after this, and then would like to invite Antoinette and Jolly to stay on for our committees fighting systemic racism.
Thank you. Randall Edwards.
Hi, sorry, my video is not on, but I overslept and I look terrible. Our Chalice Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of the Conejo Valley in California has a virtual community forum tomorrow on the Santa Susana Field Lab cleanup with Dr. Bob Dodge of Physicians for Social Responsibility and Denise Duffield and Melissa Bumstead featured in the documentary In the Dark of the Valley. Anyone is welcome. Thank you.
How do we access that?
Well, I guess my link didn't show up live here. Let me work on that while you continue. Sorry.
Okay. Oh, yes, it did show up. I just seen it. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. let me just see if there's anybody else. That was okay. And I have been remiss. I got so excited. I totally forgot to ask somebody if they could do our closing prayer meditation. So I'm hoping somebody will volunteer. But now we will go on to, my screen has gone black. Sorry, I'm blanking because my screen is completely black in front of me and I'm not quite sure why. That's better. Okay. Anybody wish to reach out or remember somebody?
I can support the prayer.
Thank you, Ruby. I thought you might. Thank you. You do a great job of it. Anybody you want to uplift? Anybody? Nobody? This is extraordinary.
Yeah, actually, Michael and I do have family members. My niece had a difficult delivery this past week, and the baby was spent some days in the NICU for to save her life. And she so it put us through quite a few terrifying days, but baby seems to be thriving and surviving, and doesn't seem yet that she'll have any lasting effects. But it just reminds you how, you know, in a moment you have to face things.
Thank you. Stephen Fisk?
Yeah, I just want to uplift Antoinette and Jolly for their frontline action work. And beyond that, all frontline workers, whether they're in the hospital during this COVID time, the sacrifice and the diligence to be online, frontline, give of yourself in service to bettering the world. May we send our prayers and support to all those people.
Thank you. Okay, Ruby, over to you.
All right, so we can just take a little moment right now and just take a breath. And know that the breath and the air is needed in all of this space and time in this universe. Because that divine power that keeps us together is all nations, all colors, all nationalities. It's each and everything in every area for good. So I know as we've come together here, this includes these frontline workers. It includes Michael and Avon's niece. And for anyone who hasn't mentioned someone that comes up later, that power is working to them for their well-being. And I'm grateful for the continued work in this community in all levels, in every area. I'm grateful for the finances that we truly are accepting and know that there's no lack or no need in this thing itself. And as I know this and more, I give it all to God in thanksgiving and prayer. And so it is. Ashe. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Annette and Jolly. I'm so glad you came. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Join us next week for our program on next Friday at 7:30. Safe and stay on if you can for the work in the anti-racism group.
That sounds amazing. I wish we could. We have to work.
Yeah, there's a houseless encampment eviction, so here we go.
I can tell you all about it on Tuesday.
Gotta go tangle with the police again. Let me tell you, I really hate it.
Have a good afternoon, everyone.